Hey there, fellow real estate aficionados. Welcome back to the House of Horrors, where we dive into real estate investing horror stories going terribly, hilariously, and sometimes terrifyingly wrong. I'm your host, Bonnie Galam, your trusty real estate attorney, guiding you through the twists, turns, and real estate pitfalls you never saw coming. This week, I am so excited to be joined by my friend, Grace Gudenkauf. Did I get that correctly, Grace?
Yes.
She is someone, I feel like one of the first people I connected with on Instagram back when I started like 4 or 5 years ago. And she has gone from being like brand spanking new investor to an amazing co-founder of this group called WIIRE Community, which is women investing in real estate. I'll let her tell a little bit more about that towards the end. But she is here because, like most of us, we have experienced some bumps in the road. And so, Grace, give us a little bit of backstory of, I guess, first yourself and your investing journey.
Thanks for letting me be here. And also, I forgot that you say horrors, and I love that. I love your accent. I'm from Eastern Iowa, was born and raised and invested there for a few years, built a portfolio of long-terms and mid-terms. Then I moved away to Arizona and started flipping and figuring out how to run that portfolio and build a team long distance. So I've been investing for about 4 years now, and I also am the co-founder of WIIRE. So I'm a full-time entrepreneur. I've got a lot of good stories, and I'm still learning things every single day.
I love it. And I love seeing like how far you've come and the absolute professionalism in which you have grown both your portfolio, adapted to living away from it, and also building up the WIIRE community.
Thank you.
I have absolutely no accent. You can never tell I'm from New Jersey. I sound just like the 6 p.m. newscasters, and I will take that to my grave. When you sent me this horror story, this is just like one of those classics. It's not something that ended in like a lawsuit. It's not something that was, you probably maybe didn't even call your lawyer over it, but it was something that like you really had to put like your creative thinking hat on and, step into this role of being a business owner and problem solve through this difficult tenant situation. So let our listeners know exactly, who these tenants were and what happened.
Oh my gosh, this is such a good story. It spans multiple years. It had a good ending. The tenants were great people at their heart. They just had a lot of really crazy stuff happening. So they lived in the top floor of a duplex and this duplex was the first property I purchased. And so they were my first tenants ever. I was like 22, 23 years old. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. So I inherit these tenants, right? They've already been living there for maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And right away, at least this one smart thing I did was I said, I'm going to get a property management system so that they don't have my cell phone number and so that I can come off as professional and really try to implement these boundaries and this new lease. Because with inherited tenants, it's really hard sometimes to retrain them because they feel like they have more of a sense of ownership than you. And I also felt like that being 23 years old, walking into this unit where these two 70-year-olds have been living there for 5, 10 years. I'm like, who am I? But anyways, they were a couple. The first time I ever go over there, it's a hoarder house. I walk in on the air mattress to the left. Somehow there's enough room in this house to have a little air mattress. Their 35-year-old daughter pops up in her pajamas. And I'm like, oh, hey, do you live here? Because I want to know, who do I need to put on the lease? Who do I need tenants insurance for? And blah, blah, blah. She's like, oh, no, I don't live here. I'm like, well, I don't see your car. How'd you get here? And I ask all these questions. She's like, no, I don't live here, whatever. But anyway, she was in her pajamas sleeping 2 seconds before I walked in. So that just sets the stage of just all the different things going on. They were super allergic to technology. I would go over there all the time to try to get them set up on Tenant Cloud.
So that's what you're using for property management?
I was using Tenant Cloud, yep.
Is that what you're still using?
I still use it.
Okay, so did they figure out how to get onto Tenant Cloud?
I had to literally do it for them, which again comes back to problem solving, not just like, hey, sign up. I had to go over there multiple times, get on their phone, hook up their bank account, but it was all worth it because I knew that that was going to help me in the end. And I'm teaching them how to do maintenance requests. I'm teaching them how to, set up their auto pay. So finally they're set up. They're always saying hilarious things. They're just kind of out of left field. Great people again. again, but just a lot going on. A few months in, I also get another maintenance request. I'm on a run at like 7 in the morning. My Google Voice number rings because they did have that for emergencies. It's the daughter who again doesn't live there, air quotes. It's like 6, 7 a.m. She leaves me a voicemail and it just says, Grace, it's getting real bad in here. I'm like, oh my God, the house is burning down. I call him back. She's like, oh yeah, the tub spout's not quite working right. I'm like, what? First of all, I thought you didn't live there. Second of all, I'm trying to teach you Tenant Cloud for these, put these maintenance requests in there. And third of all, why does that deserve a 6 a.m. phone call? But
also, like a little bit of context. Like,
yeah, just that's all the voicemail said. It's getting real bad in here.
That's like the tenant voicemail equivalent of like your parents calling you and be like, hey, it's mom, give me a call back, bye. And you're like, well, about what? I can see from the missed call that I need to call you back. Like what? Give me some context. What are we working with? Just calling to say you love me, just calling to, say, hey, what's up? Like, what are we calling about?
So again, I'm 23 years old. I'm trying to figure out how to like best handle all of these things. I've never had tenants before. They're giving me a run for my money. Fast forward about 6 months into the lease, I'm in Mexico and I get a voicemail at 3 in the morning. My phone rings. I see it's the Google Voice. I don't answer it. I let it go to voicemail and I can read the transcription of the voicemail because Google Voice did that before iPhone ever did that. And I read it and it says, hey Grace, it's Harry. I just took a healthy shit and the toilet's overflowing and I don't know what to do. I just start laughing. I'm like, what? How? First of all, why the word healthy? Like, why?
That's extra context. The first one was not enough context. This was too much context.
He's overcompensating for the context. So I call my boyfriend at the time, who I'm still with, but he was in Iowa where it was. And I'm like, you got to call him. You got to figure this out. I'm not dealing with this. So we call him. We're like, hey, it's going to be an emergency bill if you can't figure out how to turn the water off at your toilet or plunge it. And he goes and finds his neighbor at 3 in the morning to help him fix it. Calls back. Again, no texting, has to call. And it's like, I got to figure it out, blah, 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 blah. So we're like, all right, this guy, I don't know if you were on drugs, if you were drinking, or you're just a little bit loony, but this is
how do you reach your seventh decade of life and not know what to do if you clog a toilet?
I don't know. That's why I'm like, this is crazy. So then his wife actually ends up passing away, which was super sad. She had cancer, apparently. I didn't know that. And again, they've never done anything crazy that they need to leave. They're just a little bit interesting and a lot of different things going on. But as soon as she passes away, I also had another duplex 2 doors down that his in-laws, so the wife's sister and sister's husband lived in, and then her niece lived on the other side of the duplex. So 3 of these 4 units are family. So I know everything that's about to happen because of the other duplex of family who's in my back ear telling me everything that's going down. So he passes away. Apparently all of his kids are nuts. They think that there's inheritance money. These people, they could not have had a dime to their name. They have like 3 kids move in overnight, bringing in, fights start happening, punches getting thrown, complaints and reports of bed bugs coming in with them. Again, this is all from the family next door, and I start getting police calls. Just a bunch of crazy stuff starts happening.
I want to put a pin in this for a second. So were there actually bed bugs?
We did not confirm any bed bugs.
Okay, because I'm thinking in my head, like here's where my lawyer head is going with this. Philadelphia, like Pennsylvania in particular, is really strict with bed bugs, that within the first year of a lease, no matter where the bed bugs came from, it is the landlord's responsibility to terminate it. And so I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, if all these people are moving in and they're bringing their bed bugs and it's the first year of a lease, like
it freaks me out.
Beyond like an expense, it's a pain in the butt because a lot of these things are not resolved the first time. People have to move out, you have to move back in. It's like a whole thing. And you're depending a lot on tenants to do what they need to do in order to resolve the issue. And they don't always do that. They don't always do it in the way that it gets resolved the first time. And so
the bed bugs freaks me out more than the reports of violence, which sounds terrible to say, but because of all the things you're saying, I'm like, I don't know how to deal with this.
100%. 100%. Or like because we've had physical alterations at our properties as well, and I feel like in that sense, like it's not really the landlord's issue. Like, yes, it's something you want to be aware of. We've had tenants call us and we're like, no, you need to call the police. Like, what are we gonna do? Show up and break up a fight? And so it is something that I feel like I don't want to say like punt it, but it's just not our responsibility to deal with. If someone is being dangerous with other tenants or they're doing crimes, they're dealing drugs or something like that on a property, different story. But if it's like they got in a fight with their friend that came over, like that's not really our problem. But the bed bugs, good Lord. Yeah, I mean, in the scheme, it's probably like bed bugs and floods that are probably at the top, towards the top of my list.
So like you said, the violence, I'm like, I just keep calling the police, keep asking them to see the reports, because again, I really can't do anything about it. Meanwhile, I've got brother-in-law standing on the back of his duplex, calling me all the time, literally giving me live action reports of what's going on the back deck of their duplex, because he can see it, because they're like kitty corner from each other. And I know there's fights, there's all this that's happening. So I'm thinking in my head, legally, if I tried to do an eviction over clear and present danger, that's super hard. That's really hard. It's probably not an option for me. So I know I've got to get creative, because I have a tenant in the bottom duplex who has to listen to all this and is telling me, hey, stuff's going on upstairs. We don't know what's happening. By the way, I think somebody maced the apartment, because I can feel it in my apartment. And that for me was the final straw that I was like, you cannot mace. First of all, you should never mace them indoors. Second of all, with a shared HVAC system. And a duplex that has like a central hallway. And so that was the final straw. It's like, we've got to figure out how to get them out of here, but I have to figure out how to make it their idea.
Right. I'm wondering, when you were getting all of these calls and you're getting the play-by-plays, were you like, thank you for telling me? Or were you like, I need to set up a boundary with these people so they don't think I'm like their therapist about this issue?
That was a hard line to draw. I was at that point taking in all the information, because I was like, I kind of need this to build my arsenal of like, hey, Harry, I know X, Y, and Z happened. I read report on X, Y, and Z, but I definitely after that did have to, with the other tenants who were, well behaved, kind of have to draw again a boundary of like, okay, you can't just tell me everything that's happening all the time. Like, I only want to know when it serves me.
Yes. Yeah, no, I get that, because sometimes tenants, like, you'll start off like wanting to know the information, and then you're just like, I can't, like, you want to send me an email or something just to document it, like, that's fine, but like, I'm not gonna sit there and like, I don't want to be part of the drama. Like, I need to be aware of what's going on, but I don't want to be a party to it.
Right. So my idea was, I had a police officer who I got in contact with, because I'm trying to figure out what happened at this property. And he's like, oh, not like, basically a bunch of crap, bunch of family drama, nothing you can really do, just petty stuff. But you need to be careful, because this, like, if you have too many police reports, you could be put on the nuisance property list. That could cause you to lose your landlord license. Not 100% sure on how that actually works, because I've never had this issue, because I'm a pretty good landlord in the city of Cedar Rapids, but that's what he told me. So I'm like, okay, this is what I'm gonna use to get these tenants out of here. So I went to them and I just basically said, hey, all these things have happened. And I very carefully worded it that he would hear it as, this is what happening. And I was saying, this is what could happen. I was very careful with my words, and I wrote it all out. And I remember thinking to myself, I have to think like, this could end up in court, what I'm about to say. Like, is this legal? Is this right? Is this ethical? And I'm like, yes, okay, this is what I'm gonna say. So I basically said, hey, you've had X amount of reports happen. If this continues, the nuisance property, it could end up on the list. It will end up at the list at this point. And I will lose, the occupancy certificate to this house, and you could be evicted. I could evict you if also you're doing all of these things. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said a lot of like coulds and woulds. And basically, I don't want that to happen. We need to find you another place to live. I let him talk. He's like, oh, I don't want to move, blah, 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 blah. And we, keep talking, keep having conversations. I go over there again. I'm not just slapping up an eviction notice and saying like, figure it out. I'm like, I have to help this poor dude.
What's the timeline here? Like, how far out from the wife dying are we? Like, is this like 1 week later? Is this 6 months later? Like what?
Probably 2 months later.
Okay.
So,
all right. So it's a pretty tight timeline.
Terrible. I felt terrible about this. But again, you're now impacting my other tenants with the mace and the violence and the phone calls. The last thing I want to do is your wife passes away and I tell you got to leave. That's terrible. But when you bring in and allow all these other things to happen, I have to step in and get you out of there. So somehow I figured out that he had the VA paying for his rent from when I first helped him set up the auto pay, because it had to come from the VA somehow, blah, blah, blah. So somehow I had the idea of, I'm going to call your case manager and I'm going to get her in on this, so that you have multiple resources and it feels like I'm helping, not just, again, slapping up a notice and saying, figure it out.
Right.
Somehow I got in contact with her. I explained to her, like, this is very serious. X, Y, and Z has happened. You really need to relocate. If there's ever an eviction, he'll never be able to rent again. Mm-hmm. Well, that's,
it becomes a lot harder. Yeah.
It becomes a lot harder to rent, X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. Here are the consequences. She's like, I got it, understood. I'm going to help him. So I keep giving these firm move out dates. I'm trying to have kind of empty threats of like, you got to be gone by October 1st or whatever. But I'm also helping him. And I know that he is trying, but I also have to stick with these boundaries. He ends up, I even told him, I will pay your next deposit. Your quote unquote deposit refund, I'll just pay your deposit so that I know you are leaving. And I literally know where and who and when. So I did that. They're also a hoarder house. So I'm like, all right, they're going to leave everything. This guy's almost in a wheelchair. There's no way they're taking all this stuff with them. So I got smart enough. I said, I'm going to get my dump trailer out to your driveway. And if you just put everything in it, I'll give you your full deposit back and I'll pay that deposit to the next landlord. I actually did that ahead of him moving everything out. That was a little bit of a risk, but they somehow got all their family and friends to move everything out. And they left
Look at that productive action this family could do after all that fighting.
So they moved everything out except for one cabinet full of like 35 jars of half-eaten peanut butter.
What?
I'm telling you, these people were just odd. I'm like, you moved out a couch, but you forgot about the peanut butter. The peanut butter was too much.
Also, like 35 open ones? Like, I've got little kids. We have peanut butter in the house. But I'm like, I never had multiple open jars, let alone dozens. That is a unique find.
Very unique. So also, I didn't quite know where the timeline of when they were moving before I paid that deposit. We're at a point where it's still up in the air. I get a text from my tenant in the below part of the duplex, the basement. She says, hey, is Harry moving? I've been seeing him moving one box at a time down the street on his scooter. He literally was moving one box at a time on his like mobility scooter, like 4 houses down. And he did everything on that scooter. I don't think he actually needed it except for like age, but he was just zipping up and down that street one box at a time, moving stuff out. So when push came to shove, he took action. He got himself to that property. I helped him. I had to be creative. I could have just slapped up an eviction and said, figure it out, others will go to court. But yeah, there was just so many things with this family, and I have no idea where they're at now, but I hope that they're happy and liking their new home.
That's a really good story. And I think it's a perfect example of this concept that I kind of call like landlord and tenant. I feel like all the time we're thinking about landlord versus tenant, landlord or tenant. Right. And this was like not an either or. Like you were able to create a win-win situation of something that was just not positive, right? Like there wasn't a lot of silver lining to this situation that you had to sort out, right? You have an elderly tenant, you've got a hoarding situation, you've got a number of family members who either deny that they live in that house, there's not a lot of things to work with in that situation. It sounds like, was working with that social worker from the VA, do you think that was like the linchpin that kind of allowed this to happen as smoothly as it did?
I think it could have happened without her, but she definitely was. I got her in my court to be like, look, I'm here to help. I am not here to play hardball. I want to get him into a better living situation. And once I was able for her to see like, okay, getting him to a new spot is his benefit, definitely she became the linchpin to put things into motion.
Was his lease like month to month or yearly, or you just didn't even care?
I cannot remember. I was like, just go.
Yeah, whatever we can do the soonest we can do it. We're not going to hold you to it.
Exactly. I just knew going to court over this is so messy. It's expensive. I don't even know how to evict anybody. I'd never evicted anybody at this point. Still, I've only evicted one person. I just knew like, I got to get scrappy. I got to figure this out. I always call it Like playing hardball, slapping up the eviction, saying, I don't care about a single word you say, you just have to do exactly this, is only good in certain situations. There are situations.
I think it's rare situations. Yeah, I think it's very rare situations.
The one person I evicted, I had to play hardball with her because I realized you've been putting me around the ringer.
Right, but that was because you had given opportunities to not play hardball and they just didn't work. I totally agree. I mean, I've had situations like that, and our few evictions that we've had over the last 15 years or so were people where we had tried to do something creatively, like cash for keys or putting the deposit with the new landlord, things like that, and basically being told point blank, I will leave here when the sheriffs remove me. And so we're like, what else are we going to do at that point? But it was not for a lack of effort. And so, I mean, kudos to you. What did you end up doing with that unit after they moved out? Did you renovate it? Do you remember how long your vacancy was?
About a month. I renovated it. It was a really small unit. It really just needed like paint and flooring and fixtures. It cleaned up pretty nicely. And then we made it a midterm rental, furnished it, and rented it for about double. So of course I also had a financial incentive to get them out of there. But it's now like those two duplexes of this story are probably two of my absolute best properties.
Have all the units in those two duplexes turned over to midterm?
No, just that one. The other 3 tenants in that story are still there.
That's awesome though, because I feel like don't rock the boat if you don't have a good tenant. Sometimes I talk with investors and they're like, I've got, I'm under contract to purchase a property. It's, 2, 3, 4 units. And I want to do midterm rentals. Like, how do I clear the building to do that? And just like strategically, I never suggest doing that because I'm like, test the market. Like you can't flood it.
Right. 1 at a time.
You're also going to compete against yourself in a sense. And so see what you can actually get. You might be high, you might be low, but you want to figure that out 1 unit at a time. And there's nothing like the stability of a long-term tenant in terms of ensuring the cash flow that allows you to take the risk of midterm or short-term rental, because those I just find that they carry a higher vacancy, even if they net a higher return.
Agreed. I also think a lesson I learned throughout this is like, trust your gut, have your systems, have your boundaries, absolutely have a property management system, whether it's a Vail or Tenant Cloud or whatever, because that really shows tenants like, this is a business. I have policies. I would always say too, like, I'm the property manager. If people ask me point blank, are you the owner? I never lied. I would say yes, but I'm not leading with I'm the owner. I would lead with I'm the manager. I'm your point of contact. And that way, when Harry would say, well, can I do this? I could say, let me ask, let me find out, instead of having to answer right there on the spot. And I think having that space to breathe and think things through is so helpful.
Yeah, another thing that I've seen investors do is have this concept of having a partner, even if they don't have a partner. And so even if your tenants know that you're the owner, I see this sometimes even with like house hacking situations where you're like not only known to be the owner, but also their neighbor, having a little bit of a white lie to say, to give yourself that space to be able to think it over and not have to answer on the spot. I do think that's really huge. I would never suggest lying to like any sort of authority about that. Do not lie. But if that's what it takes for you to have the comfort level to tell someone, let me think about that and get back to you, then it's really valuable to be able to do that. What did you change? Did you like change any of your systems to kind of account for that situation?
One big thing I learned during that was having business hours. And when a random text comes on Saturday, especially when you're a small landlord and you only have 2 or 3 tenants and they know your face and your name, this can be really hard. But if it's not important, leave it. And on Monday morning at 8, say, hi, I just got into the office to see this. Thank you. As a reminder, here's an emergency number if you ever have something on the weekends that is an emergency. But it just reinforces them like, I'm not going to reply to everything in 2 seconds flat when you have a question. Of course, if there's an emergency, I will answer. We will do our best to fix it, but just reinforcing again the idea that this is a business. There are policies, there are business hours. I'm not here 24/7.
Yeah, I totally agree. We've incorporated those types of things even into our lease. We have adjusted fees for maintenance calls after certain hours, lockouts after certain hours, where it's just different prices because it costs us differently to be able to address those things. And so I really like that you have kind of put those boundaries up, because otherwise it creeps, right? We're turning a job that's supposed to help us leave our 9 to 5 and turning it into a 24/7 like whack-a-mole pain in the butt.
I think another system I would recommend is when you do get a tenant, I never did this to start. I'd always be like, I hope they just sign the lease and like there's never any questions and we just don't ever have to talk about it. Go over there, sign it in person or over the phone, go through the whole thing. For example, Bonnie, you said you have extra fees, like say that. On paragraph 10, you'll see the extra fees for X, Y, and Z. So that way when they happen, there are no surprises. Everybody's on the same page. And then when you're over there, you can get them on Tenant Cloud and have them do a practice maintenance request right then and there. And that eliminates my cell phone number, emailing, all of that. Like, okay, we're in Tenant Cloud. This is where all communication and maintenance and paying rent happens.
I love that. It feels a little bit old school to me. Until 2020, like with coronavirus, we did all of our lease signings in person. And it felt like a lot of time, but we would walk the tenants through it, because I feel like, especially now in the age of DocuSign, nobody reads anything. Since then, one thing we've done is, because we still will meet a good number in person, but I'd say the vast majority we're sending through e-signature now, is that we've added initial blocks. And so on the areas like fees, on the areas like house rules, what the tenant's responsibilities are, there's a big one right next to plumbing and whatnot to flush down the plumbing system, because that's always seems to be an expensive problem that people like to point the finger back to the landlord on. And so just having that a little initial thing, I feel like really slows people down, because otherwise they'll check, the lease start date, the end date, what their rent's going to be, what the security deposit is, flip through it and sign. Yeah. Every now and then we get one of these pain in the ass tenants who are a lawyer. And I say that full-heartedly. The worst are the law students. And I say that as probably being that pain in the ass law student, where they're like, look at this contract. I'm going to go through it. Like it's it's like an exam question. And you're kind of just like, no, this is more or less take it or leave it. Like every now and then we might bend the rules a little bit off of the form template that I've created. But by and large, it is like, this is it, or you can go somewhere else.
I definitely agree. It does feel a little bit old school, but it's an investment of your time and energy up front to get it all back at the end. And another thing is like the condition of the house being as is. You don't get a request that you don't like the way that this is painted, or you don't like that this faucet doesn't match whatever.
Or the countertop. We get the countertop. Like that's like, I'm like, what makes you think I'm going to rip this countertop out?
Yeah, exactly. So I had so many lessons learned. I really only ever had 2 other stories. One I evicted formally, and the other one was a rent to own gone wrong, who I actually just did cash for keys like a month ago, and it was also a crazy story. But other than that, I've had great tenants. Try to be a great landlord, try to be very communicative, and it will usually pay you dividends to be a good landlord.
I totally agree. I think like with any business that is supposed to be passive, right? Like that there's nothing passive about it. Anything that is passive is just based off of the upfront work that you put into it. And so whether that is buying the investment property, fixing it up, spending that time creating a good lease, spending that time explaining that good lease to your tenant, will probably reduce the number of phone calls that you'll get from that tenant throughout the year, or the likelihood that they won't follow your, maintenance request procedures. Or if you've got an online business, the upfront work you create in creating a product and everything that happens behind the scenes with landing pages and email sequences and all that good stuff. It pays dividends, but there's months and years sometimes of effort that goes into and the upkeep of that as well.
Definitely.
There's nothing passive about this business. It's leveraged, but it's not passive.
Yeah. I always put it in air quotes. Yeah. Passive. You can get a passive month. Yeah. But in general, it's not passive.
Exactly. You may have a passive tenant for a year, like you may have something quiet, but as things scale, I don't know the last time we've had a passive month, passive week. There's always kind of something going on. This morning we had a massive truck pulling up at our house. I'm like, what is this truck? I'm like, what did you go shopping for, husband? And he's like, oh, it's doors for I needed to replace a door. Here's a horror story of mine. Last week, we had a tenant, unfortunately, overdose in a property. And we had the police give us a call, ask if they could get in to do a wellness check, because they had reported that no one had reached this person. And they didn't want to break down the door. We had our plumber in the area, so we said he can come in and unlock the door, but I guess she had like the something, they couldn't open the door, so they had to smash a window and get in. So replacement stuff arrived today, guys. And the tenant, thank God, actually survived that overdose. It didn't seem like that at the time, but it was just like one of those things where you just can be going through your day and you have the police call and say that they're, medevacing a tenant out. And then
that's crazy.
I feel like once a year we get something, I'd say really kind of tragic, not necessarily like that, but an incident. And maybe it's just having properties in an inner city, but it's not the pretty side of being a landlord. And it's just one of those things, like, I'm not going to charge the tenant for that. I'm not going to say you owe us a window because you overdosed, but you just kind of have to roll with those punches. I hope, thankfully she's just okay. So tell us a little bit about WIIRE, about what you guys have been up to. I know you guys had released a book. Was that officially this year that it launched? I feel like I have no sense of time.
Yeah.
It was April of this year?
It was April, May of this year.
Okay, it feels like 150 years ago.
It really does. But yeah, I'm the co-founder of Women Invest in Real Estate, known as WIIRE. We have a community, retreats, boot camps, all of that, made up of hundreds of women across the US, and actually other countries as well. Our last retreat, we had people from 4 different countries, which was crazy.
That's awesome.
But yeah, we are just, here to help women become W-2 optional through real estate investing with the ultimate goal to design your life. We just talked about it not being passive, but there are things you can do and intentions you can have in real estate to make sure that it does fit with the lifestyle you want to have. We always say 100%. We're not here to own 1,000 doors. It's so that I can get my freedom and time back. So that's what we're all about.
I love that. And what was the name of your book?
The Self-Managing Landlord. It was published by WIIRE in April of this year.
Awesome. I will be sure to drop all of that information in the show notes. And WIIRE was generous enough to offer listeners a freebie, their property management freebie. Do you want to tell listeners a little bit about what that is?
Yes, we are all about being a proactive property manager. So we have a 10-step list of a checklist for you to check out and figure out how can I be a proactive manager. It's free. It's a really great start for how to get started as a self-manager. So I highly recommend checking it out.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thank you so much for joining me, Grace. This was a wild horror story that thankfully had a happy ending.
Yes. Thank you, Bonnie.